Okay, we're going to spend a little bit of time now looking at how we might evaluate the usefulness and the reliability of sources, and we're going to pick up on the analysis that we did using this source earlier called the people under the old regime. Look, we've analysed this to death. We've got lots of good information here. What we want to figure out is if it's useful and how reliable it is. We have to make some judgments here. So that's where we left that. If you need to go back and have a look at this source again, do that. But the source that we're going to connect it to is this one. What I'd love you to do right now is take a moment to pause the video and have a look at this source with your critical eye. How would you analyze it? What would you pick up on? You must remember, I always emphasize that you should remember to start with the caption and a background statement if you've got one. So hit pause. I'm going to hit pause now too, give you a moment, and it'll let me get a breath. Okay, in this video, in this source, hopefully you picked up that again we've got 3 estates pictured, no king this time. Hopefully you notice that this is a member of the 3rd estate with a hoe. There's seed on the ground and birds. There's crops, a cabbage or a lettuce, and some rabbits eating it. I'd suggest to you that this member of the 3rd estate is more likely to be a peasant, someone from a farming community. On his back, we have a member of the clergy. The cross makes it clear. And we have a member of the nobility. He has no crown, so therefore not the king, I would suggest to you. And he has a sword, okay? And this would suggest he is part of the nobility of the sword, the noblesse d'épée, okay, which we spoke about in that diagram. So we've got the 3rd estate being ridden by the clergy and nobility, the farmers, the peasants being exploited. The caption, the game that we hope will end soon, is probably piggyback. The game existed at the time. Now, what we want to do is see if this source helps us to make any conclusions about the reliability or usefulness of our previous source. Now, let's talk about that a little bit. Firstly, a source is useful usually because it gives some insight, and that insight has a purpose. So how is this source useful? Who is it useful for? How is it useful? It might be useful because it's showing attitudes. It might be useful because it's showing a belief. I'd suggest it's reliable because it's corroborated by other sources. What type of sources? Primary sources, secondary sources. I think the similarities between this cartoon and the previous etching would indicate that it's already partially corroborated, but it'd be really good if there were secondary sources that also made a similar point. It might be a reliable perspective if a number of reputable, thoughtful authorities on the topic spoke about it. So let's just throw around one source that I mentioned to you in one of our resources is a historian called Peter McPhee from the University of Melbourne. And in his book, The French Revolution, he writes, the French Revolution was a huge number of people across the Kingdom of France successfully rebelled against the absolute monarchy and the privileges of nobility. And I'm going to suggest to you that this image and the previous one both show a resentment of the mass of people, the 3rd estate, towards the monarchy in the previous image and the nobility in both and their privileges. The idea that in both the previous cartoon and this one, it's the 3rd estate carrying everybody else. So I'm going to suggest that these sources are corroborating each other, that the 3 are reliable because they're backed up by each other. Now, the more sources we can find that say similar things, the more likely it is that it's corroborating itself. Having a look at this source now, think about how useful it is. What does it reveal? How might it be reliable? Does it reveal attitudes? Does it reveal attitudes of the time to historians? Does it show the perspectives of the 3rd estate? Is it reliable because Peter McPhee comments in a similar way? Is it reliable because other primary sources, such as we must hope this game soon ends? Is it reliable because those other sources also reflect the same perspectives, the same attitudes. So when you're making a judgment on a source's usefulness, think about who's it useful for? Historians? Students? Who is it useful for and for what reason? It's useful because it shows a perspective. It shows an attitude. It reveals something of the time. Is it reliable because it's corroborated by others? So tying this all together, when we evaluate our source, we should be able to think about how useful, how reliable it is. We should ask these kinds of questions about its usefulness, these kinds of questions around its reliability, and come to a statement perhaps a little bit like this one. I'll read it to you. The 1815 etching titled "The People Under the Old Regime" is extremely useful, there's a judgment, to historians when studying the causes of the French Revolution, because it highlights a reason. It highlights the inequalities of the system. It emphasises that the monarchy, the clergy, and the aristocracy all exploited and abused the majority of the French population. Peter McPhee is talking the huge. See, I'm trying to echo some of the language there. The etching reliably captures the spirit of much of the art of the era. It's similar in message and style to "We Must Hope This Game Will Soon Be Over" from 1789. Historians such as McPhee and even Adcock, who's in one of the resources you have commented upon the inequalities depicted in it. So I'd like you to think about how I've made comments on usefulness and reliability here. Firstly, I've made a decision on usefulness. It's extremely useful to historians when they're studying the causes. I've justified my decision. It's useful because it highlights something. I've then gone on to say it's reliable. I've made a judgment on it's reliable. It's reliable because it captures. It's justified. It's similar in message and style to others. My decision on reliability has been backed up with some sort of logical argument. By doing these kind of statements, we can really improve your analysis grades, your evaluation grades, your synthesis grades when you get in the higher year levels of studying modern and ancient history.